Okay, so we should be about to go live. Just waiting to get the nod. We went for a nod. I thought we were going for a double. I thought we were going for a double thumbs up. I thought that was the agreement. Yeah, good to be here. James from the EverLearner MIP exam. Nice to be doing this broadcast. Actually, going to do 2 broadcasts today in this little session. One short one now on the Eniola Aluko case with the FA. We're just going to discuss that. I think it's kind of interesting for students potentially and for teachers to know the conditions of what appears to have happened there, and just to discuss that a little bit. And then we're going to talk about the Mayweather-McGregor physiological study, which we've done the psychological and sociocultural one already. We're going to discuss that, and then that'll be our last one before the contest on Saturday. So quick introductions. Mike's with us today, as always. Hey. Michael, how are you?
Not too bad. Very good.
Good.
Had a lovely bit of cheesecake for lunch.
Yes, you did.
Made by the wonderful Anna.
Yep. Our elder daughter Anna is somewhat of a whiz at... Well, that's not baking, is it? What do you call that? Patisserie. Is that what that is? And she does make good cheesecake. So good. Little birthday in our house yesterday, and she did a good job. So I hope you feel full. And also Marta's with us today as well on the decks.
Hello.
Thanks, Marta. Appreciate you being here. I'm actually going to get you doing a few more searches for us and things on this case. Ooh, posh, and get you thinking about a couple of things as well. But look, I mean, first things first. What we've done here is we're going to talk about the Eniola Aluko case with the FA, and we've made a bit of a decision here that Mike hasn't had a look at it at all in the lead up to this conversation. So what I'm going to do, basically, I'm going to introduce you to what I believe is the broad parameters of what's happened here. Yeah. And I just want to get your natural reaction and see what you think about it, and then we can talk perhaps more broadly about representation and ethnicity in sport and that kind of thing, and it might serve to be useful for people. So look. Basically, what's happened here now, I've based a lot of, I just put it here, based a lot of what I've said on, from what I'm going to say here on an article from The Guardian from yesterday, which I was reading on the train from London. And it just fascinated me, really. Basically, what seems to have happened is that Eniola Aluko has been playing for England football team for a number of years, I think about 6 or 7 years, possibly longer, because she was a very young player. I think she started playing for England when she was about 17 under the Hope Powell managership at that time. And more recently, since 2014, she's been one of the central players until very recently under Mark Sampson's managerial career with England as well, which has been a pretty successful period. Semi-final of the World Cup, semi-final of the European Championship, so pretty successful period. But it's come out in recent days that since 2014 and since Mark Sampson's arrival, Eniola Aluko has been feeling and has reported formally to the FA a series of concerns that she has about the way that she's been treated as a result of her ethnicity. Her ethnicity is that her family origin is from Nigeria. She's a second-generation British woman whose family happens to be from a second-generation immigrant family from Nigeria, and she's a very successful footballer. She's also a lawyer. Her brother, Sonny Aluko, also a professional footballer. I think he played for 2 or 3 different Premiership teams. A very, very successful family. And anyway, she's made some complaints to the FA and now publicly that things happened that shouldn't have happened. And I'll give you a couple of details about that. So I'm sort of taking some of this directly from the article. But for example, in 2016, she was a member of the England setup. And she was approached as a prominent England player, and she was asked by the FA to be part of something called a culture reviewer, whatever that is, a culture review. Now, I don't know whether this is something very proactive by the FA. They've done this because they want to find out what it's like to be an England player, or whether they had some concerns. I don't know, but they've done this culture review. And as an England player in the squad, they approached her and said, look, we'd like your honest responses to a series of questions. You're speaking anonymously, and whatever you say will not go any further. We simply want to review that case. So as a result of that, she shared a series of concerns that she had with the FA. Amongst them was an incident with Mark Sampson when Mark Sampson asked her whether she had any family coming to one of the England games. And she replied that she had some family coming to the game and flying over from Nigeria, which is the place of her family heritage. And Mark Sampson's response to this was, I'll give you the exact quote in a minute, was something along the lines of, Nigeria, I hope they don't bring Ebola with them. So first of all, just as an isolated incident, I think it needs to be said that Mark Sampson denies saying this.
Okay.
He either, from his perspective, Aluko's certain it was said. From Sampson's perspective, in his mind, he either didn't say it or he doesn't remember saying it. I don't know which. I haven't heard representation from him, so I don't know. But first of all, just response on that individual comment before we take this a little bit further.
Well, there's only one response, isn't there? That he can't say that. Basically, it's really difficult, isn't it? When we've got effectively a one-sided opinion from a newspaper. So there's all those issues that have the media misrepresented. Is she misrepresented for some reason? Whatever. So, but I think for this we have to assume that what we're reading is the truth.
I'm happy to assume both sides are true. I'm
Yeah.
happy to assume that any completely believes this happened and that it did happen. And I'm happy to accept that Mark Sampson denies it happening or doesn't remember it happening. That I think both can be true. It's hard to know exactly to what extent each one is true.
Yeah.
I mean, but yeah, I'll give you. I'll give you the exact quote. She said to him. So it was they were standing next to each other. They happened to be just standing next to each other. And he asked me if I had anyone who would be there, and I said I had family coming to the game family coming over from Nigeria. Oh, he said, Nigeria. Make sure they don't bring a bowler with them.
It's the sort of thing that you can see two people who are close, who have had they have a relationship, whatever that relationship is, professionally, and if they're close and this sort of thing is just like a passing comment, then you can see that happening quite a lot. And we all experience that all the time. And maybe he felt comfortable enough to say something like that because it was a friendly relationship. You can't say that though. And not because it's like not just because you can't say that, it's not politically correct, but just like, why would you want to say that? Why does that go through his head anyway? I think that's the more interesting point, is where's that come from? Why does he say that? I don't know does Ebola even come from Nigeria?
No.
So
not even that bit of Africa.
No, so it's like completely
it's general Africanness.
Yeah,
he seems to have. If he said it, he seems to have been referring to.
Yeah. So I mean, there's lots of other issues apart from what he just said.
Yes.
In terms of
Martha, do you want to make a comment there?
I was just going to say that's probably what would make it sound more racist. The fact that if a family came from Sierra Leone or Guinea,
Equatorial Guinea.
No, it wasn't Equatorial Guinea.
Oh, wasn't it?
Conakry.
Okay.
If it was from the right side of Africa, you would think, okay, maybe.
He was just a few thousand miles out.
It's exactly, that's what it's just, well, you lot. No, it's that,
you lot, the otherness.
Yeah.
That sort of idea, isn't it?
Yeah, it's interesting. Anyway, this went further. So this is not just an isolated part of the story. So let me tell you a little bit more about this. Another thing that she reported at the time was that another player, who they refer in the article as just the player because she's not allowed to be named for legal reasons, she was present within a midfielders meeting, and in that, so there was it was during the 2014 World Cup, so quite early in Mark Sampson's career as England manager. Very successful, I repeat. They got third place bronze medal in the World Cup, did very, very well. And in the midfielders meeting, this player became very, very upset. She's of mixed race heritage, and they were talking about pressing the ball, being very high pressure, trying to win the ball back early, which was a feature of their play in that World Cup. I watched every game. It was a really good tournament, actually. And the coach made an analogy, apparently, allegedly to the whole group, and he said it's like it's going to be like theft. It's going to be like it's going to be like you're kind of you're taking from them, you're thieving from them. And then he referred to this player of mixed race as having been arrested numerous times, 4 times, isn't it? So he's touching there, if that was said, assuming that was said for a second, he's touching there on the idea, some notion between potentially, or the way it was interpreted by the player, between ethnicity and tendency towards crime. Now, again, we don't know what he was thinking at that point and why he said that. I don't even know whether this person has been arrested 4 times or not.
Yeah.
But there's a sensitive comment being made that's made someone feel uncomfortable with it within that environment. So Eni also reported this incident in the Culture Review. Now, this is where I think it gets really interesting. A week after the Culture Review, remember that was supposed to be anonymous and that no one was supposed to, her name wasn't even going to be associated to it. Mark Sampson appeared at her training ground at Cobham in Chelsea, which he's got every right to do. She's paid an essential contract, every right to come and watch her train. And he informed her that she wasn't going to be picked for the next game. And I do want to tell you. So it says here, about a week later, I had a visit from Mark Sampson to Cobham, Chelsea's training ground. I thought he was going to talk about my role in the next England camp. I had been assured it was a confidential report, the Culture Review, and that my name would be anonymised so I could speak freely. Instead, he told me he was dropping me. When I asked why, he said it was because of unlioness, which is lionesses is their nickname, unlioness behaviour. And he went on to say the best he could come up with was that I looked withdrawn in meetings. So, Aluko's perhaps natural assumption is that the beans have been spilled about what she said about him and what she's reported, and potentially, we don't know, his response has been to drop her from the squad. And I think it's important to recognise at this point that Eniola Aluko in the last season, this current season, was the golden boot scorer and was not selected to go to the European Championships. 100 England caps, top scorer in the WSL, and was not taken to the tournament. Now, the coach doesn't have to pick her. It's his choice. Fair enough. But it seems suspicious, this type of behaviour. Thoughts?
Thoughts, same as before. You have to be careful to take this story and take it as literal. So, potentially, again, there's this issue that may not be the truth of what happened. Maybe she was withdrawn. Maybe she wasn't performing.
Or both.
All those things. So maybe he was right to do that. But let's assume that the article is right because it's more interesting. If that's the reason why she's been dropped, then it's just outright racism, seemingly. Just going back to the point that you made earlier on about the theft. Like, if that person... We have to know if that person has been to jail 4 times, because if that was a white person who'd been arrested 4 times, been to jail, whatever, and that comment was made, then nobody's saying
it still could be upsetting.
It could be upsetting, but it's not racist at that point.
That's right, because there's no structural relationship between ethnicity, between whiteness and tendency to go. Well, there is a relationship. It's just. In our society, we have this, and in many other Western societies, US included, and theirs is actually much more stark than ours. There is an overrepresentation of people of Afro-Caribbean background. African background, of course. There's no background of Caribbeanness in Eniola Aluko's family, which I'll come back to in a second. There's something else here, but there is a tendency for more. People to go to prison if they happen to have darker skin.
The question really is, would he have said that to a white player
with exactly the same conditions?
Same situation.
And we don't know the answer to that, but he's certainly perpetuating a stereotype.
Yeah.
He's perpetuating...
If his intention was to make that link between the fact that she's black and she's allegedly been arrested 4 times.
Well, this player is mixed race.
Okay.
So I'm assuming, we don't know who it is, but I'm assuming she has one parent of Afro-Caribbean descent and one parent of white British descent, I'm assuming. You're not allowed to know who that is. I'm sure people have figured it out. But yeah, and so
it's just kind of interesting that that comment in itself isn't racist. That comment about
it could be very insensitive, but
very insensitive, and if that player has been in trouble. I don't know, are they turning their life around? Maybe they've got a backstory and they're trying really hard, they're working hard, and he's bringing that up in a meeting in front of people in a public space. Why is he doing that?
Yeah, it would be embarrassing.
It's embarrassing.
Yeah.
So, and why is he doing that to players that he's supposedly on the same team as?
Yes.
Just why would you do that? It just doesn't make sense to make that. It's almost like a kind of seems like an alpha male kind of thing. Like a dominator. I'm in this position. I'm the boss. I can say this stuff. Maybe because I'm a man.
Yeah.
Maybe because I'm just in this position of authority. Maybe because I believe I'm superior because of the color of my skin. Whatever. But that comment on its own with no context isn't racist.
Okay.
I don't think
it goes further.
Go on.
This as I was reading this yesterday, it just kept unraveling. I was like, goodness gracious.
I'm trying to be as impartial as possible.
Yeah. Well, I think
I'm not taking side, and certainly not sticking up for somebody who
no.
is doing the wrong thing. But at the same time,
The thing I would say as a general thing, I mean, we're not talking necessarily about studies here or PE or sports science or anything like that, but as a general rule, if we say something or if we behave in a way or we communicate something and it has a negative impact, even if the intent wasn't there to be negative, we still have to take responsibility for that. And I've heard many people say that communication is the response it get. The meaning of communication is the response you get. So there are reasons why addressing the relationship between criminality and ethnicity are sensitive. There's reasons for that. It's not like this is just emerged from nothing. There's been all kinds of structural racism, oppression that have led to this type of situation, structural inequality, structural poverty that have led to these situations. So it's not like it's just imagined out of nowhere.
And it's not a one-off case.
It's not a one-off case. So let me tell you how this goes a little bit further. So when Annie was informed of the close of the review, she got an email. The email contained two things. So it contained that the review was closed because they investigated her comments, even though they never spoke to a single player who'd been affected. Interesting investigation.
Yeah, really thorough.
Yeah. And then she received an email saying the review had been closed. Second part of the email, I don't know if it was another paragraph or how they did it exactly. Second part of the email was, and now we're investigating you. So they opened an investigation into Eniola Aluko, and she works as a lawyer and she works for a sports agency firm, so therefore works effectively as a sports lawyer. Used to, good point. Marta just reminded me, used to, because she had to quit this job because of the investigation I'm now telling you about. So in that same email, they said to her, we're investigating you because we think there's a questionable or corrupt relationship between an England player acting effectively on behalf of other players, even though she wasn't acting on behalf of the players because she's not an agent, she's a lawyer, and she had to give up that job as a result of that investigation. Now, of course, from Aluko's perspective, she sees this as a form of victimization, that she has been targeted. They knew her job for 5 years, that she'd been playing for the England team, and at that moment, even symbolically in the same email, decided to investigate her.
So she's a lawyer, and she's playing for England
she's an amazing woman
for 7 years or whatever, and then they ask her to be part of this culture review. She agrees anonymously.
She agrees as a current England player. Remember, it was the following week that all of a sudden she was no longer.
Okay, so the following week he goes to her camp in Chelsea.
It's a very important point because this is not sour grapes.
I don't understand the point at which she's left her job.
Sure, a couple of years after the review of her, I don't even think it was that long. They basically she had to leave. It's not her entire job, but that role within her job, she had to give it up.
Okay.
Or did she leave it completely? Well, she certainly suffered loss of earnings as a... Go on, Marta, tell us.
Yeah, sorry. In the Guardian interview, it says, people don't know this. I lost that job. I had to give it up, which hurt me a lot. I'd been a sports lawyer for 5 years, and it wasn't a secret to the FA. So it sounds like the leaving the job was pretty immediate.
Okay, so it's there and then.
Quite closely related.
So in order to save her...
I might be wrong, but that's what it sounds in this interview. It sounds like.
Okay.
So she's got this email saying we're investigating you, which has triggered her to leave the job.
Yes.
Wow.
Exactly right. Now, whether that's balanced and whether that's against the rules, I don't know. I don't know.
If they've known for the past 5 years what her job is,
it doesn't seem right.
They've allowed her to train and play for 5 years, then.
And also, it says that it had been celebrated in the past that the FA had made,
because she's a real icon.
Thing of it.
Oh yeah.
So it's interesting. I'm going to take you a little bit further on this. So a couple of other incidents. I'm going to read you this directly. Okay. And anyone can go to the most recent 2017 European Championships and look at the skin tone of the England players on representation. That's for everyone individually to judge for themselves. But it says here, so with regard to Leanne Sanderson, another player of non-white descent, Leanne Sanderson hasn't been picked since she complained about why her 50th cap was forgotten on the same trip that the 100th cap of a white player was remembered. Leanne asked, why me? The 50th cap is a customary celebration. It's standard. there is a presentation in front of the team and you have a special shirt with 50th cap written on it. It's a big deal. She asked why she had been forgotten, and she hasn't been picked since. It goes on. Anita Asante disappeared without trace despite playing for one of the best teams in Europe. Danielle Carter, all of these players of non-white descent. Danielle Carter scored 2 hat-tricks for England and doesn't get picked anymore. This is Annie speaking, after I scored a hat-trick in one England game, I was referred to as a pain in the arse in front of all the other players. So despite being a pain in the arse, she scored this hat-trick on one of the games. It goes further. For months, one member of the staff, I'm assuming coaching or medical, I don't know which, one member of the staff used to talk to me in a fake Caribbean accent. He thought it was okay to do that. He thought it was funny. Remembering she's not from the Caribbean. And it goes on and it goes on and it goes on. So effectively, these complaints came to the surface because they were asked. All she did was be honest in how she felt. She says in the article here, "I wish I'd lied and said everything's hunky-dory."
Yeah.
She was never picked again for England, despite currently being arguably the best striker, the most prolific striker available for England selection. And there was an out-of-court settlement made because Aluko started proceedings to take the FA to an employment tribunal, and £80,000 was awarded to Aluko, and part of that agreement was that she was not allowed to speak about the case in public unless the information previously came into the public domain, which it has recently because it's been kind of leaked out, and now she's taken the decision to speak. So I think it's very important to remember as well that her default setting was to remain silent on this case, not to go and sort of shout about it. She actually kept her dignity and deliberately didn't speak about it, and now feels like she has to defend herself apparently again. So again, I'm not trying to take sides here. I'm just trying to represent the case.
Yeah.
And what issues do you see here? I mean, how do you interpret all of that? I mean, what can we?
There's a whole load of examples there, isn't there, of institutionalized racism, really.
Cultural racism.
From arguably from the FA all the way through down to the coaching staff of the team. The FA can't be responsible for an investigation into themselves and their own staff.
I agree.
Is one issue. There needs to be some sort of independent body responsible.
Interesting point.
For that.
They did hire a barrister. I do have a name here, but I have to say I can't pick it up right now.
The FA hired a barrister.
The FA hired a barrister. Remember this, in the investigation, they didn't speak to any of the players involved in the cases at all.
It doesn't seem like a particularly thorough.
Interestingly, they selected a female lawyer of an African-British descent, which is just a little thing, but kind of interesting.
Yeah, it is, but if that person doesn't do anything to investigate, it doesn't matter where they're from or whether they're male or female.
It's almost like the appearance of an investigation was desired.
Yeah.
They try to manage this situation.
Yeah, definitely.
So whatever the truths and half-truths are here, the FA seem to have tried to manage this, brush under the carpet, try and get it to go away, pay it off, etc., 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 and they failed miserably to genuinely investigate what is some authentic concerns, genuine concerns that a series of players had. How wrong and right they are, but that's how they felt.
Yeah. What I can't understand is if you're the manager of the England team, your only job is to make sure that group of people are content,
perform the highest level
perform
possible.
The highest level. This is not going to make them perform at the highest level possible. So I would sack him on that basis alone. If players have got, if that many players in your setup have got concerns about the way you're performing, football managers get sacked all the time for much less.
Yeah.
Who would?
And also, there's kind of the interesting thing is, I mean, there's all kinds of nuance to this as well. I mean, let alone the fact that the previous coach happened to be female, happened to be of African British descent, and so on and so on. So you've got a significant change in the dynamic. Actually, a much more successful change in terms of the performance and the outcome in tournaments. Got to give Sampson a lot of credit for that. He seems to be doing a good job, at least on a performance level. For me as well, like this idea of kind of cultural or structural disadvantage, I think, is a very interesting one, because what it leads me to think is, I mean, I'm pretty confident if we spoke to Mark Sampson, if he sat here today, first of all, he'd give us his view on the instance we've discussed. The other thing, I'm confident he's probably a nice guy. Sometimes people don't know the stereotypes they hold in their subconscious. Sometimes people don't know. They haven't addressed the deeper conditioned thoughts that they have deep in their psyche. And sometimes those things leak into our behavior and they affect other people.
Yeah.
And I think there's probably something here that the one about speaking in a Caribbean accent,
I mean,
just
that's what
don't get it.
Up. I mean, that's not exactly subtle.
That's not subtle.
That's not a kind of a Freudian slip.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, I didn't realise I was being a bit racist. Sorry.
Yeah. And you know, I think we have to go to the sort of definition of what we'd call discrimination. So discrimination is any form of unjust treatment. And have these athletes, let's talk about Aluko specifically, has she experienced discrimination, unjust treatment on the basis of her ethnicity? Now, it's hard to get a specific yes-no answer to that, but there certainly seems like there's a case to answer here.
Yeah.
Now, whatever the outcome is, I think this deserves a thorough investigation. And
I think so. It'd be interesting to see what the turnover is. At the end of that article, I think it was at the end, you read out like a list of other examples of this.
Yeah.
Can you read them again? I mean, there was one that...
So let's have a look. So we have to take some of this as anecdotal, but for example, so the player, the one that was in the midfielder in the meeting, she's never been picked again. Leanne Sanderson hasn't been picked since she complained about why her 50th cap was forgotten on the same trip that the 100th cap of a white player was remembered. Anitra Sante disappeared without trace despite just not being picked. Danielle Carter scored 2 hat-tricks for England and doesn't get picked anymore. So we're talking there about 5 players of black, mixed race, of some kind of dark skin tone, who seem to have been surprisingly not selected.
Yeah, I mean, that would certainly suggest that.
Mm.
You have to be. I mean, if somebody's looking for the argument, oh, and they did this, and they did this, and they did this, then they start to pick out examples that maybe aren't necessarily as relevant. So somebody scored 2 hat-tricks and wasn't picked again.
Yeah.
Okay, when did they score the hat-trick?
Yeah,
What's
I
their
agree.
performance been like in the last 5 games?
Yeah.
How relevant is that really?
Yeah.
I'm not suggesting for a second that this is all made up.
No.
That this is all fabricated or whatever, or that he's even right. Obviously, he's not. But we know how the media works. We know how this stuff maybe is dredged up to make the story seem more interesting, more shocking, more exciting, better readership. When actually it may not be as it may not go as deep as that.
I think
is it as it seems that 5 players of non-white descent have all of a sudden are no longer playing since he's come in as the coach.
Yeah.
If it's true, then what's the turnover of white players?
Yeah.
Is this just a natural turnover, and we're only being presented with one side of the argument? So I think it's important just to keep the balance, and when you read this stuff, just realise that you're reading one person's perspective. But if it's true, there's an issue.
But for me, if there's any blame to be apportioned here, or can be laid at a particular door right now, the clear sort of conclusion I come out of this with is that there needs to be an investigation.
Yeah.
And the FA had the possibility of producing a proper investigation, and they seem not to have done it, or have protected the situation, or have managed the situation, or had the appearance of doing an investigation, not really doing it. If they'd have genuinely investigated this and come to whatever conclusion was as near the truth as possible, then a lot of this would not have happened.
Definitely.
So for me, the blame kind of lies with what might be argued as a very stagnant, high inertia, cumbersome, flabby institution of the Football Association, who have not addressed this genuine concern. Remember, they went to her, because to find out, they dealt with that really badly.
That's weird in itself, right? In a way,
I don't know. I mean, maybe it's just good practice. Maybe it's just written into their development plan. We're going to do culture reviews every 4 years because we want to be in touch with all of our employees. I don't have if that's what they've done, I kind of respect that. But if you're going to do the review because it's on a development plan, and then your response to it is, well, we're going to brush this under the carpet, and plus we're basically going to fire you as well.
Yeah. I mean, if you were that concerned that you've got it in your development plan, and you really care about this,
there's something there.
And then when it comes to like that, actually, it's not as you think it is. It's not all rosy. Then you don't care about it anyway. It's like, well, what's the point in putting it in your plan in the first place? It's just for show. Obviously, it's just for show.
Yeah, well, of course, this is not the first time this happened. Roy Hodgson notoriously made a reference to, in inverted commas, Space Monkey towards Andros Townsend at halftime during a men's England international football match. So there is a precedent here. I just wonder whether the culture review actually came out of incidents like that. So it's kind of, and it would. I mean, you don't want to draw the conclusions too far because obviously we don't know. But is there a more systemic, endemic issue here that some people in this are kind of falling victim to? I think the other thing you say here as well is that I think footballers who happen to be female and play for England, they're probably a little less little less empowered in terms of their position, status, access to the media, access to bigger payouts if it goes to tribunal, that kind of thing. They're a bit less empowered than, say, their male equivalents.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
So maybe the thought in the FA was that actually we can manage this.
We can just pay it off.
Yeah, we can manage this scenario.
And it's not a massive payout. I mean, they're obviously on nowhere near as much money as the men.
No.
That wouldn't have even come close probably if it was the equivalent situation for a male player. But it's not a big payout.
No.
I kind of wish she had gone, no, I'm not accepting that, and I'll come out and tell everyone what happened.
Yeah, and who knows whether she would have been successful in the tribunal. We don't know. I mean, I guess the FA didn't want, because tribunals are public as well.
Yeah.
So it becomes a public issue. So there would have been something of that in the FA's mind as well. But for me, it's a fascinating scenario. I don't think it's about drawing conclusions, but I do want to highlight a couple of other points to you more generally about ethnicity in sport. I want to highlight a couple of phenomena that I think are relevant when we talk about this. If we just talk generally about ethnicity and sports participation, there's a couple of phenomena that are really real clear indicators that people can be treated differently and treat themselves differently because of their ethnic default. So here's one for you. So one of these is called stacking in sport. Stacking in sport, it's sometimes referred to as racial integration. I'll read this to you. Racial integration involves the allocation of playing positions based on racial stereotypes. It's called stacking. The process involves the placement of white and black players in positions in which they are stereotyped to be best suited in terms of attributed skills and abilities. So that's a published study by Eitzen and Tessendorf in the 70s. Stacking is the position segregation by race or ethnicity in team sports. So what that's basically saying is that if you happen to have paler skin or darker skin, you're more likely to play in certain positions in team sports. So, for example, a lot of research on this in North American sports. In American football, it generally speaking is highly statistically unlikely that the quarterback, the intelligent, strategic, thoughtful, creative player, they very, very rarely tend to be of the darker skin tone, African descent. Whereas if it's a position involving speed, power, aggression, running back, defensive line, there's an overrepresentation of black athletes in those positions. And we see similar trends when we look at UK sports. Association football is a good one. We have an overrepresentation of strikers and wide players, wingers type players by black athletes. Presumably because the idea is something to do with speed and power and explosiveness. And in the more creative or leadership-based positions or thinking positions, goalkeeper, central defender, central midfielder, coach, referee, we get a serious underrepresentation of black athletes and an overrepresentation of white athletes. And just to back that up a little bit, majority group players, so in this country white players, typically occupy positions considered as central, which involve most communication and interaction with others as well as control over others. Decision-making and leadership potential, and that was found by Loy and McElvogue in 1970, and again by initially by Blalock in 1962, and again by Loy and McElvogue in 1970. Minority group members, so in the US and here, black athletes, minority group members occupied those positions considered as peripheral, involving mainly athleticism and instinct, according to Loy. They were excluded from positions with the greatest opportunity of determining the outcome of the competition, according to Margulis and Pilavine. This has now taken the name of stacking. So there seems to be some undercurrent of assumption and stereotype about the physical and cognitive characteristics of different racial groups.
It'd be kind of nice, wouldn't it, when there was a trial to just paint everyone gold, so you couldn't tell, and then go, let's perform, and then we'll just put everybody in positions based on performance.
And people will put themselves, because you get this notion of approach and flight. So if you happen to be of a white British descent, someone who looks a bit like me, you might be socialized away from pursuing participation in 100-meter sprinting because you perceive that you don't have the characteristics to participate.
It's madness.
It's unbelievable.
It is.
But
it's crazy.
Next.
Is there dates on all those studies?
Yeah. So they're relatively historic. They range from 1962 until 1999. But what are the things? I mean, if a PE student was watching this, I mean, what are the things that we're not saying that football is racist or cricket is racist. That's not our point. But what I'd like people to do is start noticing these trends. Are these trends perpetuated? Are they being challenged? Can we challenge the same thought processes that maybe we've been conditioned with too? I think that for me is the important thing.
Yeah.
And
that's where it starts, isn't it? Having an awareness of your own prejudices, and not necessarily in a negative way, just your own conditioning is probably the right way to put it.
Yes.
Your own conditioning, your own experiences. Right. And if you can address those and notice when it's misplaced, then if everyone just sorted themselves out, so to speak, if everyone just concentrated on their own prejudices, misconceptions.
But it's hard, isn't it? Because the conditioning is external. So prejudice and bias are really the same concept. You're biased towards or away from a particular group. A stereotype is like a simplistic generalization. So all people in this group are good at X, Y, Z. So all people with darker skin are fast would be a massive overgeneralization, very simplistic generalization. And we could even argue it's a myth. A myth is something which is a widely held belief, but it's false. Okay, so this widely held thing that most people accept, but ultimately has no ground foundation to it. And I want to introduce you to one other set of ideas here, and I personally think this is perhaps most fascinating of all. Another really well-researched area of the ethnicity and sport conversation is the language which is used. Remember, language primarily reflects thought, cognitive processes. So ideas that we have in our mind, we represent them with language, and sometimes it's non-conscious. We're not deliberately leaning our language in our adjectives and descriptions one direction. We might be doing it subconsciously, but this is a fascinating thing. So this is a study from May. So this is published on May 4th, 2015. So very contemporary, and it was published by Vice News, online newspaper. And they did an investigation. And by the way, this phenomenon is studied really widely in peer-reviewed journals. So go and have a look at that real sciencey stuff too. But this was of ESPN's 2015 draft NFL coverage. So the draft picks of the American Football League in the US. And basically what they analysed the words that the pundits and commentators use to describe different athletes. And there's a huge range of the study, and there's not enough time here to go into all of it. But I want to highlight one thing in particular to you, and these are the words that were only used to describe white players. So if I tell you a word now, with regard to a white player, it was never used to describe a black player. If I tell you now a word that was used to describe a black player, it was never ever used to describe a white player. So let me start with the white players first of all. So exclusively, they were described with some of the following. It's kind of in this kind of nifty little thing. You can go and have a look at it online, and we'll put the links in the description. So some of these following words were the most typical for expressing meaning for white athletes and were never used for black. Intelligent, quickly, knows, decision, technician, workman-like, brilliant, dominated, unflappable, sponge, I'm assuming like took on information, like a sponge, overachiever, desire, commitment, improving, transitioning, information, functionality. So those words were used commonly to describe white athletes and never black athletes. Now the words that were used to describe black athletes but never white athletes. See if you can spot a difference. I am being a little bit selective. Natural, explosive, gifted, huge, aggressive, struggle, dynamic, body, motor, dynamite, shoulder, prowess. Some of these words were used only to describe black athletes and not to describe white athletes. So, and again, this is broadly covered in the literature, and I would encourage people to go and read it. But we've got a phenomenon here where even on the level of punditry and expression, our professional commentators seem to represent white athletes and black athletes with different types of descriptions.
Well, I think what's interesting is that people would not notice this.
No.
Especially the people using those words wouldn't notice it.
Absolutely.
People watching telly wouldn't notice. The athletes wouldn't notice it. This stuff just goes, it's just what it is. And it just goes undiscussed, unnoticed, until people like this come along and really helpfully do a proper study on it and tell us, by the way, there's a difference in our language when we're describing different people. Then that's the point where we have to go, oh, okay. To myself, I have to reflect and check. But you know, this is just one study of people seemingly who should be careful about what they say. They're on telly. They're commentating.
They're professionals,
on a world
right?
level.
I mean, they're professional
presenters. So you would think of all people, they would probably be pretty good people at representing the population of which they're talking about. Other people are openly not that way. They're openly racist at one extreme, and then everybody sits on that scale somewhere in between. So, yeah, it seems like there's an issue.
Yeah, I agree. I think I think it's really important to express that if someone on Match of the Day this Saturday refers to a black athlete as powerful in an individual case, there's no problem with that.
It's not wrong.
It's not wrong, because the athlete may well be a professional athlete. They're probably powerful, especially in football.
But what's interesting is when you look at that over a period of time, like these guys have in the study, and said that word is used more than a word like intelligent, and vice versa. Then there seems to be an underlying, an undercurrent that people aren't aware of, which is perpetuation.
And perhaps, this is beyond the scope of this little recording, but if we were to look at these stereotypes and whether they've been perpetuated from a historical standpoint, and whether there's stuff in history where these kinds of ideas were used more broadly in society for discrimination to be used against one group against another, there basically is. I mean, that basically exists. So these myths seem to be perpetuated, and they leak into the reality in these types of environments. And I think that's a really fascinating thing. One of the problems I think we have here is, a couple of times here we've used the word racism or racist. We have the concept of racist as a definitive term. One is a racist or not. And if you are a racist, you're a racist forever. There's a finality to it. Sometimes people can represent through their language or behavior, whether it's to do with ethnicity, gender, age, class, whatever. Sometimes we can represent a conditioned idea, which if we challenge ourselves, we can think, why did I say that? Or why did I think that? Or where did that come from? And maybe it's more healthy to think about, let's call it prejudice, as a moment. Someone thought and represented a prejudicial perspective, and it's really information people need to be able to challenge those ideas and be able to think in a more coherent and clear way. But there's such kind of emotion related to these ideas. It's very difficult to have that conversation. But for me, that's stacking, and this one I've just named it myself, adjectival stacking. Thought you'd like that, Marta. Adjective. You happy with that? Adjectival stacking. Does that work? You got your speaker on?
As long as they are all adjectives.
They're not.
Yes, then it's not.
There's some adverbs in there.
No, then if there are adverbs.
Linguistic stacking.
Linguistic stacking. We're going to name it one way or another. We're naming it because I'd really encourage people to go and look into it. I want to repeat again: we are not suggesting an individual word by an individual person is in any way a representation of racism.
I'd also like to see the same study repeated in a different part of the world.
Yeah, me too.
To see is it reversed or is it just not there?
Yeah,
there could be a whole different outcome.
Well, maybe that's one thing we can encourage. Are there people out there who are willing to sit through a series of, I don't know, cricket, football, netball, whatever matches?
Perfect dissertation for somebody.
Fantastic dissertation for somebody. Can somebody select a sample of experiences and actually go through that and see what language they come up with and design a study which investigates this more thoroughly? And I would be fascinated to read that. For those who are students out there of GCSEs or A-levels or BTECs, for me, the point I would like you guys to take away from this is that there are some real issues here. No one's saying it's hard. I can give you my personal opinions, but my personal opinions are simply just that. I mean, they mean nothing more than that. For me, it's about having sensitivity to the issues and trying to understand why these things exist and whether we can challenge them. And I do want to make one final point. I mean, we could be accused in something like this that this is just kind of political correctness gone mad. You should be able to say whatever you want. I'm broadly against the political correctness movement because it does sort of stifle people from feeling free to talk about what's on their mind. People are worried about what they want to talk about and those sorts of things. And it comes back to that point about labelling people as racist. People are terrified rightly to be possibly labelled as that. But what I think is interesting as well is that what's it called? What was the term I was just using? So preventing people.
Prejudice?
No. When people aren't allowed to talk about certain things. Political correctness is also a label. So if we raise these issues and someone goes, "Oh, that's just political correctness," no, we'd like to open a discussion about this whole and learn from that discussion. That's all.
Yeah.
So political correctness should not be used as sort of like a ideological label to shut the conversation down. I think this is stuff we should really address.
Yeah.
Anyway, that went way longer than I intended. Interesting stuff, though. No, anything you'd want to add to that, Mark? Any thoughts you had? Nothing. No, Mike. Anything you want to summarise with?
No, I don't know if they're the right place to bring it up, but you've showed me a good sketch before called, I think it was Horace and Pete. And I won't go into it too much, but there's a phrase in that which is racism is what you do, not what you say.
Yeah.
That's kind of like a really nice sketch. I'd encourage people to go and find it.
Yeah.
It's probably got an age limit on it. Possibly.
There's a couple of words in that I wouldn't necessarily want to associate myself with.
Yeah.
But it's an interesting one. I mean,
the message is good though.
The message is good because I think you're right. Race. Let's call it discrimination in general, prejudice in general. Discrimination is a behaviour.
Yeah.
So very often we can get wrapped up in the semantics and the linguistics of whether it's racially intended or not, or
whether it's politically
correct, or whether it's chauvinistic or whatever. But it's the behaviour, and I remember a great quote as well by one of my favourite authors, Anne Michaels. Complete different context. She said, "Goodness is not in the face. It's not what you appear to be.
Yeah.
Goodness is in the hands. It's what you do. It's what your behaviours are." And I think that's a good thing.
That kind of sums up nicely the whole issue around the FA.
Yeah,
it's not what they say they've done.
It's what they're actually
going to go and do about it.
Yeah. So are you actually going to investigate this issue? Because it's definitely an issue.
Yeah.
Who's right and wrong, we don't know, but there's definitely an issue, and have the balls to actually investigate it.
Yeah.
Like, be brave enough, be honest enough,
yeah.
and maybe it comes down as well to money as well. Sometimes in this structure, maybe they're managing it from that perspective. Anyway,
maybe they've got enough money to investigate something of this importance.
Spent a lot of money on that stadium, on Wembley. I mean, they could have completely gutted the entire structure of, for example, youth football for girls and boys in this country for nowhere near the amount they spent on that stadium.
Yeah.
Just saying.
Anyway, another chat.
Spain do quite well. They don't have a national stadium, do they, Spain? No, they do quite well in football.
Where do they play? Just at
various places.
club
Valencia, Barcelona. They don't often play Barcelona, do they? Because they get booed. They play Madrid, play at Atletico Stadium quite a bit now. Must play up in Bilbao, San Mamés.
They tend to play all over the country, really, and I think whatever town they go to, it can be quite an event for some towns, some stadiums.
It can be done. It can be done. Yeah, anyway, that's another conversation. Maybe we'll do that live another time.
Cool.
Right, we're good. Thanks, Marta. If you want to switch us off, that'd be great. Cheers, folks. All the best.
Bye.